So next up we have Morgan Muchnick and Sabrina Westerman. Sabrina Westerman has worked in applied engineering in many fields, such as civil, agricultural, mechanical, and electrical engineering. She has recently retired from her academic career to work for CubeCab, as she has been interested in space since childhood. Morgan is the founder of the M2 Group, LLC. He has 20 years of expertise in government and public affairs, including senior professional staff to the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, focused on space, cybersecurity, and transportation. His passion is working with innovative companies that are disrupting state business paradigms in need of reform, such as CubeCab. Morgan, Sabrina, thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you. Sabrina,
Thank you for having us.
excellent.
Can you see? Can you see the screen?
We can, so that's good. Our tech is working.
Sweet.
It's always nice.
The screen looks good. I think what we'll probably do is I'll just say a couple of quick words of introduction and a brief overview of a small handful of interesting pieces of legislation that are floating around the Hill these days. And then I would like to leave the majority of the time for Sabrina to really dig in a little bit on a more granular level about what small innovative companies like CubeCab is doing and can do, where in space, I use in quotes, because it's a lot of great work that we may not automatically think of when we think of some of these big macro projects that are sort of space related. So if I could just say very quickly first, just in 2 sentences about the last speakers. So I thought it was a very good discussion. My only concern about that is some of the issues brought up were very, very nuanced. You know, mentioned this thing of senior citizens living in space. My only concern is how much of a society, how serious are we as a society? Our society doesn't feel as serious as I wish we were. And I feel like one person says one thing on CNN wrong or Fox News wrong, then they get blasted all over social media and their careers are damaged. And it's not a great time, I think right now, unfortunately, in America, to cultivate thoughtful, serious discussions on some of these more complex problems. That gives me the biggest pause about sort of think where we are in America. We don't have to get into that now. I just wanted to get that off my chest. Okay. So
honestly, we could have a whole hour-long show about that at some point, Morgan.
Yeah, for sure. So if you can go ahead and go to the first slide, let's just maybe sort of jump into this. That'd be awesome. Can we go to slide 2? Great. So obviously right now, the vast majority of oxygen being taken up here in DC is obviously the midterm elections coming up, and then the big spending bills that have just come through over the last few months or so. So, you know, this is just a very quick sort of bit about, you know, what was passed recently with the Inflation Reduction Act. Depending on where you view on that and whether that's an applicable term or not is very fair, but it's that is by far the biggest piece of legislation that, you know, is, you know, being discussed and debated and used for and against different candidates in the upcoming midterm elections. So that's, you know, almost all of the intellectual energy. We can go next slide, please. Let's see. We can go to the next slide would be awesome. Let's see if maybe I can press it. Okay, there it goes. But there are a few bits of interesting legislation. It was brought up a little bit earlier, this issue of Marco Rubio's interesting bill called the Space Act, which I find very interesting. It's really focused on China, and it's really focused on sort of it's going to be, I think, a number of steps as the United States starts to differentiate and separate itself from China and China-related interests. So it's important to know, though, this piece of legislation and 1 or 2 other ones that we'll mention next really are not being really discussed at any really high level right now. So it's a boring discussion if I say really nothing's going on, but there are some things going on. Maybe in the next Congress, some of these things might take hold. Definitely 0% chance that between now and November, these things will become law. But they're there, and Marco Rubio is very much establishing himself as a leadership role on the Republican side on space issues, national security, and China. That's clearly the case. You can go through these on your own time. We'll make these available, these slides as well. It's a very high level, simple introduction to some of these pieces of legislation. If we could pivot to the next slide, please.
bit of a delay, but it's coming.
Yeah, no, it's there. It's no problem. Thank you. Yes. So this is a piece of legislation focused on how NASA manages STEM-related grants and trying to improve and make a more accurate reflection of what the society looks like in terms of STEM or STEAM, as some people use, and things of that nature. It's trying to improve and modernize how we use our grant programs in the United States. This one is bipartisan. It's not just Senator Rubio. So if it's a piece of bipartisan legislation, I really do think that so as a quick pause on this, looking ahead to the next this coming up election in the next Congress, at worst, from a Republican point of view, at worst, the Republicans will win the House of Representatives. They may also win the Senate. That seems to be a little less likely these days. Regardless, it's going to be a split Congress, and the only chance of legislation being brought up through the process is going to be bipartisan in nature. It's going to be very, very gridlocked. So the positive from a space advocate's point of view, however, is that space does offer a unique opportunity to become a bipartisan point that maybe things can get done. Cybersecurity is another one of those issues. But most issues are going to be hyper partisan and hyper sort of aggressive with each other. So let's pivot to one more quick little bit of information that just came out a day or two ago, which is quite interesting. Go to the next slide. And that is what's called the Orbits Act. This just came out of the Senate just I think a couple days ago. Very interesting piece of legislation. And I think that, this has to do, and this actually will be touched upon with CubeCab as well, was how we manage and continue to identify and work with orbital debris. Obviously, we had the very troubling issue with Russia and the anti-satellite event, a while back. And as we watch Russia wage war in Ukraine, and we're worried about what they may or may not do to lash out, whether it's nuclear or whether it may be anti-satellite, this is going to be a continuing issue and something that's going to be on the forefront of a lot of policymakers who are worried about that aspect of national defense. So I think, let me go ahead and sort of leave off this, and I want to make sure there's plenty of time for Sabrina, and I want to also engage this a little bit in our Q&A if we have time, because I think there's a tremendous amount of interesting nuances and issues and sub-issues that are around this issue, this public policy issue. And I wanted to keep also this overview a bit more focused on domestic security, domestic policy, less about international affairs and international conflict. That's always, unfortunately, overarching, a lot of the things that we think about right now. And that's going to be a fine line that our leaders in Congress and the office and the presidency, they're going to have to sort of walk. But thank you for this. And Sabrina, I'm excited to hear your presentation.
Thank you. So first of all, why on earth does CubeCab care about rapid launch? Well, that's because we actually developed a rapid launch system for 3U CubeSats. And in doing so, we found two things that is really somewhat barriers to having that as an option right now. And one of them is government funding for the rapid launch procedures and or technology development. But another one is the FAA and other organizations have so many different paperwork restrictions that are going to be a bit problematic when we start into rapid launch. And so that process also needs to be sped up. Now, why do we need this? I mean, we've been doing the same thing for years. Why do we change? Because we could use this rapid launch for restoring communications quickly, early detection of natural disasters, repair or replacing damaged or outdated satellites, and also rapid response to on-orbit events, as we've been talking about. So, many years ago, this is where I get into the story. Many years ago, I lived basically in the middle of nowhere, but we had house phones, which are, I know, an old concept, but we had a house phone. And we got one of those newfangled phones that had caller ID on it and plugged into the wall as well as into the phone line. Only right after we got that, Hurricane Andrew hit, and that was in 1992. And when Hurricane Andrew hit, we had an entire week without power, without seeing another human being, basically, because everything went down. And we weren't even on the coast, okay? This was up in the mountains. So, you know, a hurricane of that size, while we go, oh, well, that doesn't happen very often, we actually have quite a few that have happened. But in the realm of what happened during that week, we had a line of tornadoes that were drawn to the center of Hurricane Andrew, which downed trees, rows of them. So all of our pastures had the fence down, and our neighbors, our next door neighbors, actually had the the road was completely blocked, but it was up at a point where we didn't see it from the house. And so we never realized that they were completely cut off from civilization. So they could not even leave their house. I mean, they could leave their house, but they couldn't leave to go to town and get supplies. And so there was a lot of things we had to do. We had to get the old phone system out in order to make a call and let people know we were okay. We had to actually, I remember we took the old TV out of the house and hooked it up to a car battery just to get the news, okay? So that was kind of things that most people don't think about when it comes to the power going out, something just as simple as the power going out. And the thing of it is, when these natural disasters happen, communications is one of the first things that go. And communications to me is the media, you know, giving and sharing that information. You know, we didn't know how bad it was even in town versus where we were, because we couldn't get to town and we didn't have any newscasts from town. So, you know, thankfully we survived, but there's so many people that don't have a house phone, even something as simple as a house phone anymore. So there's a lot of things that happen. Natural disasters have gone up. The amount has gone up. The severity of them has gone up. They produced 21 named storms last year. I mean, this has been the worst hurricane season we've had. But it's not just hurricanes, it's hurricanes and earthquakes. I mean, I remember watching the news stories about the Northridge earthquake in '94. Terrible, terrible times for humanity. And of course, more recently, we have Katrina. I actually worked with some people who had gone through Katrina and had evacuated to our area. And one of the things that they kept bringing out was the lack of communication, because they could not communicate with friends and loved ones. They had no idea where their friends and loved ones were. They didn't know where their neighbors had gone off to, where they had evacuated to. And so they have no way of contacting them, even when they left. But while they were there, some of the stories was so horrible yet interesting that, you know, organizations like FEMA did not have the capability to communicate with their workers, so they ended up delivering things like bottled water to the wrong areas and things like that. You know, we have advanced in technology to the point that we can actually, you know, restore these communications a lot easier with satellites. And this rapid launch would be able to help with that. The first 72 hours after a natural disaster is something that's very vital. And we can, with rapid launch, get a satellite up and restore communications by then. And that's amazing. FEMA could even have an entire satellite constellation on the ready so that, you know, the minute this happens somewhere, they can restore communications. The technology's there. It just needs these few hurdles to get through. Also, I found it fascinating that NOAA is actually working on sensors for CubeSats so that they can monitor oceans a lot better. And in doing so, you know, they can give tsunami warnings more earlier. They can track hurricanes earlier. And there's so many benefits from this entire system. Another way to use these is to repair or replace damaged or outdated satellites. The technology again is there, and you know, like the comment just said, you know, yeah, from Morgan, public policy is behind in this, you know, and we're focused on what we've always done in the past, and now, you know, we can actually make life better, not just for us, but for the entire United States. And as we've been talking about the on-orbit events, Laura was talking about this yesterday with the ASATs. If an ASAT is used and a satellite blows up into a million pieces, it's so much easier to get that fixed immediately than to have that cloud of debris sitting there in orbit, growing exponentially and threatening all of our assets. It's easier to handle. It's just like any kind of mess. If you spill kitty litter somewhere, it's easier to clean it up right then than track it through the entire house. Okay, same principle. If we use this rapid launch, we can use it on these on-orbit events and have it where it does not affect the rest of the world. So we have the ability to rapidly launch these things. CubeCab specifically has developed this next day rocket launch, and I really am excited about it. But, you know, it's like so many other companies. We've been looking into orbital debris and been working in that field a little bit. And there's so many companies that have great ideas that are just ready to implement them, but they need that last bit of technology to get that hardware tested and ready to launch before they can finalize the stuff. Well, once it's finalized, then we have the policies, and we're going to run into that problem. And it's not, the reason we have these policies is because we are used to having months, years before a launch happens. And so, hey, why don't you fill out this paperwork? And we've got this thing, why don't we do it manually? And we'll check the trajectories of everything else while we're at it. And they're used to having that cushion period, that lead time. And they don't have that. They won't have that with rapid launch. And so a lot of those systems are going to need to be changed. And whoops, that is the slide I want. Okay, most of those policies are going to need to be changed. And, you know, the paperwork and approval process right now must be streamlined. It must be organized, and it must be automated so that we can have that quicker approval process for satellite launch. And we can get these things up in the air and restore communications or use them for what we need to deal with these on-orbit events as they happen. And, you know, some things can be set up ahead of time, as in what-if scenarios, but that paperwork process is going to be a very big issue, I think. And in the policy aspect, that's how policy and media combine there. So yeah, that is my section. and we have links to further information. And Morgan, do you want to start with the questions? If we've got any questions?
Sure. And I would just say that, we will distribute this slide deck for anyone that's interested. So feel free to,
Yes.
when we get a copy of that, to reach out to us, with any sort of questions and things like that. I think what's particularly interesting is that this type of technology, the sort of low cost, quick launch, not trying to be everything to everybody type of technology, really can help so many aspects of American life that we don't traditionally think about. And I think that's an underlying part of what Foundation for Futures likes to talk a lot about, I think, is this is such a cliche, but rethinking the paradigm of what space is. And I think CubeCab isn't a multi-trillion-dollar company that wants to launch a satellite to completely redo GPS. It's about using inexpensive, quick technology to immediately help problems that will immediately see value. Things like Sabrina mentioned with natural disasters and storms and the like. And for another day of discussion, we can talk a little bit about how we can. We've published some of these issues on the website. How we can work with governments, friendly governments like Ukraine, like Cuba dissidents, to ensure that repressive regimes do not block out internet access, so that we can sort of within a day or two get up a small cluster of satellites and then restore at least at the minimum 3-4G type of technology, so that people can know that that the American people in the West is behind them and things like that, and allow them to communicate with their families. And there's a lot of really neat stuff that this type of technology can do. And sometimes as people who are participants in the space industry, we get a little bit frustrated because we know how much this would help, and it's tough that there's not broader buy-in from sort of the powers that be to sort of implement this type of effort.
Adrian has a question. If space-based solar power satellites were developed, might rapid launch be able to restore power, assuming a receiving antenna is in place or can be deployed quickly, as well as communications? As far as I'm concerned, yes. I'm sure it would take some components that may need to be repurposed to make this happen. Maybe the solar powered satellites could be pre-built, and dishes could be placed in certain areas that are in high frequency to lose power communications. But yeah, I would think that that would be a good thing.
And I've had one more thing, and then Sabrina, if you want to sort of maybe say a word about this. I had touched earlier in the presentation briefly about the Orbits Act and how we sort of deal and mitigate these sort of events that satellites blow up and these things. CubeCab has a very neat little technology. I use little in quotes, but that is really designed to do some cool stuff with that. Do you want to say just a couple of quick words about the sort of Pac-Man that we're sort of working on?
So yes, we're currently working. I'm actually part of a 2-person team working on designing a CubeSat that will literally eat debris, so that it grinds up the debris and uses it for ion cube, which I think is pretty amazing. Of course, it's only doing little things right now, but at some point in the future, it's going to get quite a bit bigger, I'm hoping. But yes, if a ASAT happens and a dust cloud comes up, these little satellites are going to be designed so that any debris that's under that's 1 centimeter or smaller, which is not trackable by current ground-based satellite systems, we are going to be able to launch this thing right into the middle of this dust cloud and have it dissolve this stuff. I mean, grind it up, obviously, into this ion dust, which we will then use for propulsion to keep it going. So it's making its own fuel, which I think is pretty awesome. I'm working on the grinder end, and we've got somebody else working on the ion end. But yes, it is a fascinating, the whole ways you can use debris. And I mean use. I don't mean just deorbit and throw that stuff away. Reusing that stuff is going to be pretty interesting, I think, and that's going to be a field for the future of space, I believe.
I think it's a great point, because I think the big mega chunks of metal and steel that break off are clear and they're obvious, and there's ways to deal with that. But like, there's going to be just unimaginable amounts of these minuscule little particles floating around, mucking up other satellites and getting in the way of GPS systems and things of that nature. So, you have to think, and this is why, for all the problems that the United States is having, and it's been having for a while, this is an example of the type of advantage that we have built into countries like Russia and China, is that a top-down, state-driven set of policy fixes are never going to be as good as the American innovative spirit. So it's not just CubeCab. I mean, I think we're doing great work, but there's tons of small companies, around the US and in Europe and Australia, interestingly Australia, and starting to come up a little bit in Africa on these things, where it's private sector innovation and entrepreneurialism that's finding problems that weren't necessarily so obvious. And I think that is something that, if we have it there for us, we just need as a nation to come together and sort of, I think, do a better job of managing and utilizing that type of effort that we have done in the past when we were a different type of society.
I can see that, yes.
Sabrina, I hadn't heard of CubeCab before today, but I'm really excited about this. There are so many organizations out there that would love to have launches, but they have to, like you said on your website, they have to beg a ride from someone doing something bigger. This is going to open up all these other projects that have wanted to do things and now can. It's going to be a major disruption. So bravo to you.
Yeah. Another thing I love is, sorry. Another thing I love is being able to test out components for larger satellites, because you could test out a component on a 3U CubeSat very easily, have it space worthy, and then use it for other things. So there's this rapid launch thing is going to be a major breakthrough, I think.
So with this new ability, do you foresee the creation of new companies tailored towards this size of payload?
Hope so.
I hope so too. Yeah, I see a lot of people using it as this size payload, especially for like academic use. They're already using it for academic use, to train people in satellite use before they get into using bigger satellites. So yeah, I think this is going to be a major breakthrough.
And not only that, and this is sort of what drew me to this type of company, is that they sort of want to be the satellite company of the people. The idea is a low cost type of offering, such as they have, makes it more palatable to things like community colleges, small hospitals. Imagine being a coalition of 3 or 4 community colleges in one city or one county, being able to pool their resources and develop their own satellite system that they can then use to teach space-based economics and space policy issues to their community colleges and students. Even develop maybe a technical program, like we have technical programs for auto repair or HVAC systems, and this is a type of technology that would allow for that, without having them to leverage their entire future to hire a more like traditional large payload type of satellite system. So it's neat stuff.
It feels like a pathway to innovation that could be compared to like in-house manufacturing or in-house printing, and the way that changed a lot of companies that didn't have to go out of house. So I think that's going to be fantastic. So we have time for one more question. I think we have a comment in the comment section. Sabrina, did you want to take that?
Yes, Adrian's, she said CubeCab's doing next business day launch, borrow a page from the software industry, launch and thereby test a new build each week to rapidly develop and space qualify some new component. Once a week sure beats 1.5 launch opportunity, 1 to 2 launch opportunities per year. Yes, that's kind of the basis of it. You know, he's definitely on the right track. We have, you could build something, launch it next week. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try this and launch again, you know, and with rapid launch, we can do that. And the technology's right on the cusp of doing that. We just need it to start working in that direction.
Fantastic. Well, Morgan, Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us today. Fantastic. I can't wait to see how much exponential growth we get out of this new business model.
Yep.
Thank
Thank
everybody.
you.